The Islanti Star Empire, a sinister culture descended from an ancient civilization from the lost planet of Galarian. All attempts to contact these imperialists have ended in violence. Other systems wisely keep their distance from the Star Empire's territory and its seat of power, the Aeon Throne. Only this policy has kept the universe safe. But the balance of power threatens to shift when a crashed starship on an allied colony draws the Star Empire's attention. In the wreckage is an ancient experimental starship drive with the key to supercharged hyperspace travel. If the Islanti can repair the device, they could travel faster than any other civilization, putting the entire galaxy within easy reach of conquest. Swiftly, the Star Empire invades and annexes the colony's planet, whisks away the drive, and kidnaps the colonists studying it. Transporting supplies from Absalom Station and en route to visit an old friend, the player characters arrive on this colony. Soon, the Star Empire's merciless presence becomes clear. Worse, the Islanti have dragged the hero's friend and the stolen drive to a distant prison moon. Can the heroes rescue the colonist and keep this potentially devastating technology out of Islanti hands? Or will the might of the Star Empire crush them when they dare stand against the Aeon Throne?
Hey, promo! That was the first time we've done that. Welcome everybody to Starfinder Wednesday. I'm your old buddy Dan. Here is your host again. That was an amazing intro. Troy obviously is the voice of that AP. We hope to do more of those. I think that was really nice. So get used to that. We'll probably play that a lot. So anyway, if you liked it, let me know. If you have feedback on that, let's talk about it someday, shall we? Let me know. I'm Dan_Servo on Twitter. Yeah, we'll do that. So anyway, today we've got a treat for you. We've got Owen K.C. Stevens and we've got Jason Keeley, two members of the, where's the right button? There we go, of the Starfinder team. And we are going to recap the first AP for Starfinder. Dead Suns, I think that the incident at Absalom Station is the first one, and I thought since we've finally moved up, which happens to be sitting right here. My gosh, since the first one is now done, and we've now this month have started with a new AP, or last month, is it September now?
It is September now.
I thought it might be fun to kind of recap and kind of look back. I think that later in the show it might get a little spoilery, so be careful, but we'll give a warning before that happens. But at first I thought it might be fun just to kind of recap what was that first AP and how did it go, and let's kind of I think I've called it recap, rehash, and reminisce, or whatever it was.
The 3 R's.
The 3 R's of APs. Everybody knows this. I didn't just make it up on the fly for Twitch. It's all a thing.
Well known.
So, yeah, I thought it might be kind of fun. Like I said, it might get a little spoilery, but we will make sure to let you know before that happens, because we know a lot of you are listening to this, listening to the AP right now with different folks that are broadcasting it through podcast or Twitch or what have you. So we'll try to let you know. But first of all, welcome to the show, everybody.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah?
Hi, Dan.
I've got a couple, mostly I have images of the cover, so we can go through those. So when it comes to the AP, not Starfinder in general, because there's the whole team for that. But when it comes to the AP, what was each of you have written one of the chapters of an AP.
Yeah.
Which one did you have, Owen?
I did Empire of Bones, which was the last of the 6, so it was the culmination of the whole thing, and it was at the higher levels. But it also meant I had an advantage because, of course, since we released the very first one at the same time we released the core rulebook. That meant that we had to write the first few before the core rulebook was done. And I had the advantage that since mine was coming at the end of the year, I could actually do at least most of my writing after we knew what all the rules were, which is, it turns out, a big help for writing an adventure.
And then you made it harder on yourself by adding an extra system to that that you had to write for that adventure.
I did add a whole new set of rules for even bigger starships, but that's because I wanted even bigger starships. So,
well, and that's the thing. If it's not there already, just make it yourself.
Yeah.
Put it in there.
Well, and I'd done back matter for a lot of the article. I've got at least a monster in every issue so far.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
okay.
I've been trying to have at least some level of involvement in all of them we've released so far, and at least several into the future. We'll see how long that trend lasts.
Yeah, and does that count? So for every issue of the AP,
yeah.
Currently also? Is this like a streak that is
so
going?
So far through...
It's about 12. It's going to be a 12-volume streak at least.
At least a 12-volume streak. So...
I like that. So we're going to keep a leaderboard on that, and we're going to make sure that we know.
Yeah.
It won't come to an end. It's just going to keep right on going. So.
Wait, out of my hands, because he and Chris Sims are running that show now. So.
Oh, nice. Okay. And speaking of Jason and Chris Sims.
That's right.
Jason, which one did you pen?
That was number 4, The Ruined Clouds.
Yeah. I like the cover
It's
of
a
that.
good. It's a good cover. It's a good guy. It's a good, strong guy on from the front there. Yeah. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. I was tasked with basically this is the first volume of the AP that goes out of the Pact Worlds.
Yeah.
So this is the introduction to sort of like the weirdness of other worlds that Starfinder can hold. So I got to basically play in this post-apocalyptic kind of area, ruins of a once great civilization, and the beings there are descendants of these people, and what's that like living amongst the ruins of your civilization's greatness?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
When we were talking about the first AP, before we decided what it was going to be, back when it was me and Rob and James Sutter, who's no longer with the company, and Amanda Sum, and I don't think you were mostly in these conversations yet. We were talking about the need for the first Adventure Path, which is the only one we'd been promised we'd get all of, right? If this had not been a big success, we would have done the first 6 no matter what. But if it had been a horrible failure, which it wasn't, it's been delightful, but if it had been, we might not have done more. So
really? Okay, and this always is, I'm going to keep stopping you as you're
that's
talking,
fine.
because there are so many things about this story with Starfinder that surprise me. And a lot of times, it comes out in the form of an apology to a customer when, like, for instance, right off the bat, like right on Front Street with Starfinder, sold out by Friday afternoon.
At Gen Con,
Thursday afternoon.
Was it Thursday?
I think it might have
Thursday.
been
I think it might have been Thursday.
It was the first day,
3:00.
right.
And the idea and the running theme is, why didn't you have enough there? Why didn't you have more? And I keep trying to tell people, it's like, I don't think you understand. Like, we thought it was awesome, but we weren't 100% sure that everybody else would think it was awesome.
I mean, we brought more copies of the core rulebook.
I think it might be Steven is in the chat. From Roll for Combat. He said it was Thursday gone by noon. So yeah, it was Thursday. Thank you, Stu.
We brought more copies of the core rulebook to Gen Con last year than we had ever bought of any product.
And that is true, yes.
So we allowed for, at that point we knew it was going to be at least initially popular because we'd gotten feedback and sense of excitement, and people had been reading the articles that a number of news outlets were releasing, and we were doing blogs. So we had a pretty good idea that it was going to be, that book at least would be a hit. So we brought a bunch of it. Yeah. It just turns out a bunch was maybe somewhere between a quarter and a tenth what we should have brought, which that's obvious in retrospect, but at the time when you're deciding how much product are we going to ship, how much other product are we not going to have there, right? The booth is only so big. So if we say we're going to have 5 times as much of this, that means something else we're not bringing as much of.
Right.
And how much do we want to risk having to pay to ship it back, right?
That is the convention nightmare of, how much am I going to end up hauling back?
Yeah.
And I think you're right. It's a thing where you try to balance it. And I don't know. I thought we were fine. Would you have conceived that we would have had the issue that we had with Starfinder before, like the day before Gen Con starts? I did not anticipate that.
I mean,
I guess I was hoped we would sell a lot.
Yes.
Right, and have but still have stuff throughout the convention, at least until Saturday, right? Like, yeah, it's not, there's only a few more copies left, maybe on Saturday. That would have been ideal, right?
Yeah.
We sell out, but later and more.
Literally, we were having meetings where we were saying, look, it's safe to tell people we're bringing plenty. It's not like we're going to sell out sometime late Friday or early Saturday, right? We just brought too much for that. That is literally the conversation we were having beforehand. So we have occasionally sold out of stuff by late Saturday or Sunday. And I was sort of, my wildest hopes were that we would do that, right? And then, I mean, we sold out of Armory again this year, which we obviously didn't. We brought as much Armory as we've ever brought for a follow-up hardback to a book line before. So this is something that we need to do better at. Obviously, we're looking at these things.
I think that you're right. We do. I think that it kind of took me by surprise again. Like I felt like, oh, of course it did. Like, why? Of course. Didn't we learn our lesson, you know? But yeah, that was something that didn't last. It was gone Friday, I think.
Yeah.
And so there's obviously something that has been tapped into with Starfinder. I'm playing it right now. I have a blast playing it. I think that it's the way that it plays, I think it's perfect. Hey, Krob, how are you doing, buddy? I think it's perfect that we're calling it science fantasy.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that nails it perfectly. And it just has that imagination tap that hits that perfect part of my brain. And you can see it out there when we've got everybody putting things up on social media, where they've got in the first issue, Incident at Absalom Station. There's a part where the PCs are walking and there's a newscast with like a flash and everything. And somebody built that. They were like, you know what? Fine, I'm gonna make a news reel that plays. And I can't remember the person's name. I'm sorry, but they did such a good job. It looked like a news brief, and it was so awesome. And then somebody else created a hacking part where it's like you're gonna hack in and check out these emails, you know. And so it's like, great, here's an interface, and they have it play up on their TV, and people are like, as they roll, they can hack. And he made all that stuff. It looks legit, but it's just all animation. And
today, did you see that someone made passports for the second volume on Castrovel using the sort of the elf gates that are there, and it's a physical copy of a thing where they've made this thing that looks like a passport with a blue cover and a picture on the inside and stamps.
It's
as a
amazing.
prop for their game.
As a prop for their game, yeah.
And when we were first looking at what we're going to do for this first adventure path, one of the things we very much wanted to do was to hit that science fantasy theme, right? So we started on Absalom Station because we sort of wanted Absalom Station to be a common launching point for the games. And you can start your game somewhere else, but when I'm reading a new role-playing game, one of the things I want answered as a GM pretty quickly is, what am I supposed to do with this, right? You can have a fascinating setting and good, solid rules, but if you don't tell people what are players supposed to be doing, what are the characters, what is this game designed to encourage?
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why, I mean, we literally start in one of the places where we've given you the most feedback. That also let us put an article in the back of that issue that talks a little bit more about it, so that we can use the back matter to sort of flesh out the world. And start as that as a common starting point and introduce the kind of events, not even just specifically, but just the broad category of events, the sorts of things we see science fantasy adventurers doing. And the whole arc of the adventure path was built on those ideas. He mentioned that his is the first to go outside the Pact world. So since we have the setting information in the book, which is one of the big differences between Starfinder and Pathfinder, is that we've got some good core setting information in there. We really wanted to use that and show people how we expect that one way that can be used. So we start on Absalom Station, and then by the second one, you're going to other worlds of the Pact worlds. And then by the time his comes along, you're higher level, you've already had this sort of short tour of some of the major sites in the Pact worlds. You can go beyond the Pact worlds, and we keep going sort of further and further from the safety of home through the AP until by Empire of Bones you're floating in the vast deadness of space sort of on your own. So that's one of the things that we wanted to do was show that, you know, this area of play can be different from this area of play, that the game has a natural progression, and the whole game supports that. The whole fact that we've got, you know, travel times that are broken into the Pact worlds, and then we've got the near, then we have the vast, and that allows a GM to have different themes in different parts of his campaign setting.
Right. So now I think, and we might as well just start getting into the first episode, the first issue of the Adventure Path, Incident at Absalom Station.
Yep.
Without getting spoilery yet, when it comes to putting that AP together, knowing that this is the very first one, like Starfinder's here, people are just learning the rules. Time for that AP. You have to have that AP. Launch day one.
Yep.
What are the steps that you take that might be a little bit different than putting together just another AP? Like, oh, we've got them. This is the first one.
So that's a conversation again that happened a great deal with Amanda and Sutter and Rob and myself, and a lot of that was like trying to showcase different parts of the rules. So, like we have Starship combat, and you don't necessarily have to have Starship combat in every adventure, but for this whole adventure path, since that's a new part of the game, we really wanted people to get to play with those rules. So we made sure when we're plotting those out, okay, there in each one of these there will be at least one Starship combat segment, so if that's something that's exciting to you. But at the same time, we don't want it to be all Starship combat, because if you're not interested in that, when you were outlining one of the early ones.
I mean, I 6 on.
Yeah.
I mean, 7 on.
Well, I mean, when you did the extended outline.
Oh yeah, the extended outline. Yeah. That was a lot of like what Owen said, to sort of like think about what is new and what needs to be explained. I think in the first couple ones we sort of said, like, you're about to have a fight, here's the map, and if you need the rules for the cover, you need to check page this. We're after now 7, 8, 9, we're saying this provides cover, but we're not necessarily pointing you to the place in the core rulebook where you would have to look that up. So we're doing a lot of that. Here are introducing factions like the Starfinder Society, and the first one is sort of this is a big deal for the world of Starfinder. You're going to meet them and find out what they do, and then you're going to do talk to a bunch of people. For specifically the one, that may be too much spoiler if I go on exactly that, but sort of also like getting into the plot of the Adventure Path, but also sort of maybe threading in a couple cameos from other important factions that might show up later, to sort of create a living world.
We also there were some themes and backstory elements that aren't in the core rulebook at all. Okay. That and again, that's sort of spoiler to say what they are, but we started wanting to say, okay, we've covered sort of what the major famous threats are in the threats section of the core rulebook. Right. But this is a whole galaxy of adventure, so there's going to be stuff that isn't well known, that isn't part of the popular culture, that we want to be able to showcase and begin to introduce and use in one way in this adventure, but that we might come back to. If you think in Pathfinder terms, right, they introduced the Rune Lords in their very first adventure path, and that is a group that, while only recently are they going back to the full Rune Lords, that lore and that history has influenced a number of adventure paths over the years. So that's the sort of thing where we want to start looking at what are those things that we might want to have callbacks to and come back to. And so we don't want those to be the major part of the adventure. We want to keep that pretty straightforward. But when we're doing background, where is the city from? Who built the MacGuffin that you're looking for? That sort of stuff. We very much wanted to think about how we might want to use those things in the future.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. As the game develops, it's like, oh, that's a part called the spike, and you start to learn this Absalom Station becomes this tapestry that starts to make sense just by playing through that first adventure. And then the other thing that I noticed, like you were saying with Space Battle, like with Starship Battle, it's there. It's not a huge component. I definitely wouldn't say that AP is built around Starship fighting.
Nope.
But it's there. You can dip your toe in the pool, as it were, and kind of play around a little bit with it. How much of Incident at Absalom Station did you need to make sure that it's like, okay, we should probably put this in and kind of introduce this and kind of introduce to that, and how did you understand when enough was enough?
A lot of that was up to Rob McCreary, right? I mean, he was the writer. He also developed more adventures in the first AP than any other single person. And while he was at the time he was doing mostly the AP and the world building stuff, he's now become the creative director, right? Yeah. So that was a natural evolution for him. But we did have conversations about, we ought to make sure that we have some social engagements and some combat engagements and some Starship engagements. And through the AP, you ought to have some exploration and some Starship travel. And, here are the rules that we've sort of given this much space and support to.
Right.
And in some ways, it's the same in the back matter. We were looking at, okay, we've specifically said that Galarian isn't around anymore. How do people react to that fact? I mean, it's hundreds of years in the past to the modern Starfinder people, but is it seen as mythological? Are there people that are interested in artifacts from there? What are those elements? And how we introduce those ideas, which we frequently do in back matter articles, helps build and shape the world. Because with that first one, and we didn't even have a monster book yet when the first AP came out, right? So everything that was there had to be something that was in that book. So Rob really had to crunch to be able to get everything he needed in the back of it. And it was something that through the first several was an issue, right? If we're going to have an encounter that has a lot of undead, well, even our first Alien archive only has a certain number of undead. So if you want a bunch of them, you have to add those in the adventure.
Right.
So that's another way we can use these to sort of build and round out the whole world, the whole galaxy, the setting that we're playing with.
Like those, like the void. The void creature, what are the void zombies or whatever?
Void zombies.
Yep.
Those things, man, oh man. And already in the chat, I'm seeing somebody was saying that the boss fight, in Absalom Station, and we can get into that more later, was really tough. And I think, for me, it's really tough. Like the boss, very tough. But the fights there, it's very tough, and we'll get Rob on here to talk about that. But I did talk to him, about it. I was like, man, you didn't pull any punches, literally. Like you get hit, and he was like, I want them to know it's a tough game, And I love that. I like thinking very quickly. Oh man, I might need to really take my strategy seriously.
Rob is relatively famous in the company for saying things like, if no one ever dies, what's the point of having rules for dying? Right. True. We have rules for dying, so if we're going to test out everything, there ought to be at least moments. And we don't want to build killer encounters, but we do want things where if you're not smart or if things go horribly against you, or if you don't be smart about, spending resolve points from getting stamina in between fights, where part of your tactics and your thinking and your resource management is, hey, we're not sure how tough the next thing is going to be.
Yeah.
So we don't ever want you to walk into a room and, it turns out there's a weird face on the wall, and if you walk through the face, you are just disintegrated. That's not our style, right? But we do want stuff that will test out your characters and sometimes push them a bit.
Yeah.
The other thing, of course, is that for the very first AP, we weren't sure what the baseline was going to be for people, and we didn't have all the monsters worked out yet. We were still working on our monster rules at that point. So some of that is just a case of going, this in our little home play test worked well, right? We had so much time to go through it, that was all fine. But it turns out that if someone rolls just a little below average, which can happen in a fight, that is maybe tougher than we had intended.
Yeah, I know for me, when we've started, we have a Monday game that we play, and we're playing through some Starfinder Society, and I love it. I know for me that those first couple encounters that we had, and I'm this first level Yosoki, I immediately thought, I need to rethink my plan. I need to understand a little bit more what I'm doing, because I think for role playing in general, it's like, well, let me just jump in. We'll play around a little bit, and I almost died. It was something. And so I think when it comes to Starfinder, it was one of those things that it hit me where it's like, oh, this is kind of important. Like, you really want to pay attention, and I liked that. It's the alien horror type thing where it's like the stakes are raised. So getting parts of the background of what the tapestry of Starfinder is, you've got some of the rules, you've got some of that other stuff in there. What I don't remember, and maybe I'm wrong, but does it address the gap at all? That's not a part of Incident Absalom Station.
So it's not part of Incident Absalom Station.
I don't remember that being in there.
Yeah, I mean, we don't talk too much about. But obviously, we're not going to tell you what caused it or what's going on with it, especially in the first volume. But it's not. It's definitely not addressed too much in the concept of the entire plot of the adventure either. The whole adventure path. It is something that the gap for us is more. It's something that has occurred that we can. That has basically allowed the setting to take place, for lack of a better term. So we're not going to necessarily go on and exploring what it is. It's more of like a jumping off point. It's not a mystery to be solved. It is a baseline of like, oh, everyone's starting from scratch here at this point.
Right.
And we're just going to move on from there, because what's more interesting is that 3 years after the gap is ended, you basically get interstellar travel, and that opens up the universe, the galaxy, to everybody. So that's more about like, oh, well, we don't know much about our past, but we can learn about our future by going to all these other places and meeting other new people and getting all those ties.
We do talk about it some in the context of some of the other conversations we're having. So when we are talking about people's reaction to like relics from Galarian, right? Well, that is a pre-gap event. So just by putting it that way, by saying, hey, that's a pre-gap event, then we're telling people that is how things are viewed, right? There's this period of time and no one knows what happened during that period of time. But we can sort of use archaeology and similar things to try and figure out what happened before that. So it's a period of time that itself is a mystery, and things before that, obviously, we don't have all the records of how we got from there to here.
Right.
But we can explore what happened prior to that. The gap itself is something that obviously there are people in the setting who are trying to figure out what happened and solve the mystery, just like there are people in the real world that are trying to solve dark matter and dark energy, right? Those are mysteries that we do not have good solutions for, and there are obviously people that work on that. But that is not the driving force behind most of the adventure stories that one would tell about the real world, just as the gap is not the driving force behind the adventure stories you would talk about Starfinder. Now, if a group wants to do that, that's one of the areas that we're largely leaving it up to them if they want to play with it. We wanted the gap as a narrative device that we would be able to lean on and depend on as being there to build off of and move forward. It's also one of the reasons that you don't have to know 10,000 years of history for Galarian and however many hundreds or thousands of years it's been since then as a new player, right? We can say, hey, a whole bunch of stuff happened. Mostly that doesn't matter anymore because there's this jumping off point here, and then here's just a few hundred years of science fantasy that you can get a quick idea from without having to feel like, if my character understands my heritage must go back obviously 20,000 years, and that's a lot to try and work in, especially if you're a new player.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that I like the mystery of it. I like not knowing what's going on, just because it never fails. Once you know the solution to something, it's a magic trick. Once you know the magic trick is done, it's not a fun magic trick anymore. So that wasn't a driving force, and it probably won't be going forward with the APs. It probably won't be a thing to explain the gap or anything like that.
We don't have any plans to do anything like that at the moment. So we're moving again, sort of moving forward, telling some other stories.
Right.
It may be again, like we sort of talk about Pathfinder. We never explain what happened to Aridin. Really, and maybe that'll change if there's during the playtest of the second edition, if Eric wants to be like, well, with this, and we'll do a different mystery instead. That's fine. So if there's any other weird thing that needs to happen, then we'll explain it and then move on to the next. But in explaining it, we'll probably introduce 3 other mysteries because you need those mysteries to be there for to move forward stories and to give also other home campaigns to things to explore as well.
Well, and in the real world, there are things that you don't know. There are unknowns, and in a role-playing game, especially if you read the source books, frequently that sense of the unknown can be lost because, especially if you're reading the stuff, if you want to be a player but you also want to know the world, so you're reading all the GM material, it can be very, very easy to become fairly bland about, I know every secret doppelganger who's in charge of a city. I'm aware of every reptoid plot. This has all been laid out. And then there's no sense of I'm playing in a world where there are things that I don't know.
Right.
And so this is one way to sort of artificially ensure that there is an element of the unknown, even for the people that do read up on all the lore and all the back articles and everything we say online. So, we have a theory on what has happened during the gap. We have our baseline idea of what we believe in happened, what caused it, what's going on. So we could play with that more if we decided that's what we wanted to do, but as Jason says, there's no plans for that at the moment.
Okay, yeah, and it's kind of that thing of you don't want that to get in the way of the storytelling. It's like, well, there's still a story out there that we can tell. Speaking of story, speaking of AP number 1, getting the story, we're kind of laying the ground, the trailblazing AP, as it were. Looking back now at the point that we are at, number 1 has been out. We were just talking about this before I hit before I hit start streaming. Was, oh my gosh, it's been out for a year. Like this thing that I just put up here on the shelf has been here for a year. And obviously it's been in your lives longer than that because you've needed the time to put it together. Any lessons learned? Anything you look back and you're like, we should have thought of this, or man, I'm really glad we did that. What do you take away from looking back at the either your particular issue, the AP as a whole, or just the first incident at Absalom Station?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
That's
Nice.
You wanna
One of the things I've discovered is that a total vacuum occurs a great deal more in Starfinder than it does in Pathfinder. And there are little things like, if there's a total vacuum, you can't hear people scream. I mean, I realize that that's a sci-fi horror trope, but when you're writing an adventure, if you mention, here are things that this NPC might say, but you've set up a total vacuum, you have to explain, how do you know that that's what they're saying?
Yeah.
Right? Are they getting hold of you by a comm link? Are we going to have, just enough air? Are they going to hack your comm receiver unit so that you can hear them? Are they telepathic?
Yeah.
There are things we can do, but especially if you've been writing, fantasy, sort of medieval fantasy material for, I'll just randomly say 20 years, you don't necessarily immediately think, I've created this environment where that interaction, which is very normal interaction, is different in this case. So even we have to de-Pathfinderize ourselves a little bit.
This has nothing to necessarily do with Incident at Absalom Station, but in the course of having developed several adventures over the past several months, I have come to note that I have to think about security cameras a lot. Like, why are there any here? Where the feeds go? What thing can the PCs do? I've had to do that like in several adventures, and it's something that's very interesting. Wow, okay.
If
Definitely.
they're going to want to hunt it down and find where the drive is that's storing all these images.
Right, yeah, so if they're breaking it,
that's actually I never even thought about that.
Yeah. So it's not something you ever have to deal with in Pathfinder, with the minor exception of someone happens to be scrying on you with a prying eye spell or whatever. But
But the thing about scrying is that most likely people won't necessly expect that or know to look for it.
Right, yeah.
Whereas everyone knows the security cameras are a thing.
Exists.
So,
Yeah, exactly. Thinking about and other things that I personally enjoy are pop culture. Starfinder can have pop culture. Pathfinder can have something like that a little bit with like tales and bards and stories being told over a long distance. But in Starfinder you get to have TV shows and music, types of music that
reality shows
specifically, right? Yeah, holovids and stuff like that, and sort of starting to trickle a lot of that in. There's some little bit in going on in there in Dead Suns, but sort of even more so being able to halfway define it. You don't necessarily have to. You don't necessarily know all the rules to Quidditch, but you know what I mean. It's there. It's a sport. It's there to tell a story and to show you that there's a wider world. You can tell some stuff. We have mentioned sports names and names of types of music that we don't exactly explain what it is, just to give it an evocative feel.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's interesting because one of the questions, as soon as the first Incident at Absalom Station came out, one of the questions Rob got asked really, really soon is, hey, you mentioned a particular style of music here. What's that like? And Rob's like, it's like whatever you want it to be like, right? What we're doing is saying, hey, there are styles of music that are different from what we would think of. But the concept of music styles is not something that we really play with in Pathfinder, other than maybe saying, hey, Teldoran opera exists, right? But you don't have rock versus pop versus, right? We could have corpse pop as a genre in Starfinder.
Okay, I like it.
Yeah, see? So that a lot of people have really glommed on to some of the pop culture references, the imaginary Starfinder pop culture references that have been made, not only in the AP, but also very strongly in Starfinder Society. And that shows us that there is an interest in us introducing those things. And that's one of the reasons why we are looking at, are there things that we should be talking about more in Starfinder adventures, or at least name dropping, that we just wouldn't normally do in a Pathfinder adventure?
Okay. And that's the thing that I keep coming back to when it comes to creating things for Starfinder is sky's the limit. It's really whatever you want to do. Like when you talk about Corpse Rock or whatever it was, it's like, oh yeah, I could see that. Like the planet of the undead.
Yep.
You know, that's exactly what they would do. I would imagine they need music in their lives. So
they're just like us.
They're just like
us
With less skin.
They're just like
sometimes.
us.
Yeah.
And the question we're getting in the chat, which I think is actually a very good question, is how much actual science research are you doing when you're putting together these stories? I know there's there's weightlessness rules, there's movement in 0G and all of those things, and then like you were saying earlier, there's no sound. There's a vacuum, so there's no sound wave. You can't hear anything. How much of those things were brought in from real sciences and was given a thought to, or did you kind of go with, well, this is what would be expected, and we're going for narrative, or?
So we gave a thought to a lot of things.
Okay.
And then a lot of things we ended up not wanting to worry about, right? Like, there's a reason why all of our travel times are very much made generic and random, because otherwise we would have to actually be talking about orbital mechanics.
Right.
And I mean, I've played Traveler. I'm not saying I can't have fun with orbital mechanics, but orbital mechanics is not everyone's cup of tea. You don't necessarily want to have to actually calculate fuel use versus a slingshot around a planet to figure out whether we can get there before we run out of food, right?
That's true.
Well, and then you also have the problem that if we put those in and someone gets their numbers right, well, it turns out your characters all starved to death 27 months before you get to your end destination. Make new characters.
Yeah.
But we also have we can add magic and we can use that to explain things away, and we're the same cosmology as Pathfinder, right? So Pathfinder suggested, for example, that the sun has connections to the positive elemental plane and the elemental plane of fire, and actually put cities on the sun. That is something that existed before we came along with Starfinder. So we're using that same cosmology, which means magic is a real force.
Right.
Like gravity, like the strong and weak and electromagnetic forces. Magic is a real thing, and there are gods that can actually warp reality, and the wish and miracle spell are in our game. So we've got that built-in, okay, maybe this doesn't particularly make sense. In the armory, we have silencers that are hybrid weapons, so we don't have to restrict ourselves to the way silencers work in the real world. We have the concept, but we specifically say, hey, there's some magic going on with these, because if you had magic, why wouldn't you overcome the limitations of real-world silencers so that you could connect one to a laser weapon or even a sonic pistol, which doesn't make any science sense. Sure. But once we can do magic, sure, the kinetic waves hit you and hurt you, and no one can hear them because magic.
Yeah.
We do, whenever I'm doing a planet's diameter, radius, and gravity, I try and use the real-world formulas for that. Unless it is specifically a world where we have set, like we've had one of the worlds in the AP as a variable gravity because the masses are moving around on the inside. Okay, well, there we have a story reason why we want to vary from the real world science where things of a certain size, the mass is concentrated and it centers itself automatically. But the rest of the time, if we have said it's 2/3 the diameter and this much of the mass compared to Galarian, i.e. Earth, for the densities, and this is the gravity, we've actually used that formula.
Okay, so there are things that this is a constant that we're going to keep coming back to every time this comes up. These are the values that we're going to keep plugging
as much as we can.
Yeah.
All right.
Unless the story is better, taken a different direction.
Narrative has to come, like gameplay and having fun and making it a good time. Has to be a consideration.
We had a multi-hour meeting before we released the core rule book about the fact that space is not cold. Because we originally wrote space is cold. And Mark Seifter, who's on the design team, was helping us at the time, came in and said, guys, space isn't cold. Space has no temperature to speak of, but it's not cold. And I was like, oh, he's right. Yeah, I didn't think about that because, people talk about the cold depths of space, right? Wrath of Khan mentions it. But that is not scientifically accurate, and we don't want all of space everywhere to have this magical cold effect going on just so that we can use a narrative trope. So we do try and bring in science any place where we feel like it won't make it a worse game.
Right. Is there any, and also, so first of all, I'm really sorry. There is a considerable background hum going on right now, and I can't do anything about that in Fontana. I wish I could. It's connected to the building, and as much as I wish this were a completely silent studio, it's not. Hopefully in the future it won't be a thing, but I can't do anything about it right now. I'm sorry. Hopefully it won't be a problem coming up. So is there, because I've got a character in my party, is there that is a social media star, because that, why not? There could be. Is there the equivalent of a YouTube that is pervasive through Starfinder, like a dedicated, this is a service that's offered, that's branded, or is that...
We haven't named anything like that, but and the way we sort of have worked on what the internet is in Starfinder is a little different, because it's like every planet has kind of its own infosphere is what we're calling them, and just from the limitations of travel, getting information from planet to planet, they can all be different, and you can it says, we also say you can also download information from the infosphere, like if you want to, watch your shows and while you're on your Starship. So I don't think there's necessarily a 100% centralized YouTube style thing. I'm sure maybe even each planet, most of the civilized planets have their own version of that. But that doesn't mean you can't be famous on two planets simultaneously, because they're still importing, pop culture from each other. It's very, very much if it's famous over here, it'll probably eventually get famous over on another planet. So
I personally sort of assume that everything is a combination of Netflix and discovering that, like, David Hasselhoff is huge in Germany, right? So you've got a blending of cultures as material is popular is picked up from one infosphere and moved to another. So, like with Netflix, I'll frequently say, "Hey, that looks interesting. Well, I've never heard of it. Oh, that's a disaster movie that was made in Norway 3 years ago.
Right.
I'll give that a try." So you've got that sort of thing going on, where things that were popular in one culture could move to another. But I think you could also have something that isn't particularly popular in one culture be much, much, much bigger in another. We haven't played with that a lot, but we have talked about things like there are bootleg broadcasts of death sports from EOX. Zoe with an exclamation point is a particularly famous sports announcer and host from EOX. We talk about in some of the Starfinder Society stuff, like Strawberry Machine Cake is a very popular musical group. So clearly those things do transmit, but I think it's very much going to be a case of things are picked up and they're carried and updated from world to world. So you wouldn't necessarily have, like, YouTube where everyone goes to this one place, but you might well have brands like HBO or Cinemax, or more like studios, even like NBC, ABC, where we know this group has made this content, and then the content is going. Sometimes it's bootleg, sometimes it's legitimately imported, and that's something we could well play with in the future that we have not done much with at the moment.
Yeah, I think. Again, kind of the idea of information moves so fast, and all of that sort of thing. So I think you're right. I could see that there doesn't need to be one hub for all of that information. It's really weird. I think a lot of the things, when you really start breaking it down, a lot of the things that happen in Starfinder, it's like, oh yeah, I guess that really would be that way. All right, that makes sense. But I think that it's just that initial push of, well, it doesn't make sense at first. And then the more you think about it and kind of expand where that's coming from, it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of stuff that's really interesting like that.
There are also places where we want to give examples, but let players and GMs make their own examples if that works better for them, right? So we would not necessarily want to say, hey, ScryTube is the #1 entertainment video broadcast tri-D option everywhere in the galaxy, because then we've taken away the option of someone saying, hey, I've got this idea that I want to maybe have, Abadar Video is big on this planet, and so it's, half megachurch religious broadcasting, half infomercials, right? Exactly. And Papil is the saint of Abadar here. And if someone, and now they've said that, I think that's a cool idea, and I may run with it somewhere. But
Avid.
Exactly. But we don't want to take away people's ability to make those stories by making absolute declarations that this is universal. But if we say, hey, this is very, very popular on many worlds, then we can give you examples that you can use as you wish.
That's the word avid. Avid.
Avid.
Avid. Oh no, I like it.
Yeah.
I like it too much.
Well, you're in charge
I'm
of
gonna
APs at the
figure
moment.
out.
So,
Well, yeah, but setting, I'm gonna get it past Rob.
Well,
that would be a major
Rob's
setting
very,
thing.
very busy,
Yeah.
so he won't even notice.
So getting in to the AP again, and lessons learned. Space is a vacuum. You can't talk in space, and knowing that that's going to keep coming up now.
Yep.
Like that's going to be something that I've got to put in my pocket and understand that whenever I do an AP, I got to remember that if there's no, if they're in space right now and it's a vacuum, how are they going to talk? What are the types of things coming from rules like that you were able to learn before it got, because neither you guys didn't do the first one. So by the time it gets to yours, how far along are you in episode 4, right? In episode 6 or issue 6, chapter 6. How far along are you, and were you able to look at that and see the release, or you had to be done by that point?
I had to be done pretty much before. I think the first one was wrapping up, getting shipped to the printer, but I had to be done.
Yeah, but it hadn't been released, so we didn't have feedback.
Definitely didn't have any feedback.
So you didn't have the feedback.
I didn't have the feedback. No,
later.
No, I was able to look at the other ones and see what had been written, but no feedback.
Yeah,
what would you have done differently, if anything? I mean,
there's a couple of things.
Nothing is a perfectly acceptable answer.
Would have done slightly differently in a couple of the encounters that I had written. I don't know, without giving too much away, I can get into the nitty gritty of like, I would have had monsters attack them instead of this other, other thing happening. Some stuff like that. I maybe would have changed up some of the monsters, because there were a couple. Apparently, and this will be a spoiler, and sort of. Apparently, there are a lot of things in my adventure that are immune to critical hits, and I did not realize that as I was writing it.
It was a mistake.
No, not.
Well, and I developed your adventure, so I should have checked for that, right?
It's just one of those things that you don't notice necessarily right away.
But it's a fun surprise to learn later. I'm sure.
Yeah. When I'm listening to other people play through it,
although
why is everything like that? Everything. It's not everything.
One of the interesting things about Starfinder is that because we have critical hits work differently, mostly people don't have critical hit dependent builds.
Okay.
Right. It's nice to be able to get a critical hit, but you can't really get critical hits more often than that 5%, hey, a natural 20 is a critical hit, right? We don't have those crit ranges and mechanisms and bonuses to confirmation rolls, because we did away with all of that for speed and simplicity. So one of the upsides of that is that even if you run into something that is immune to critical hits, your character isn't invalidated as a result, because your character should not be built around, I'm dependent on those critical hits.
Right.
Which is another interesting things that we discovered going forward, is that certain builds just don't seem to naturally occur. The flip side of that is, and I did have the feedback on this by the time I wrote mine, a lot of people have ranged attacks. Way more, both for NPCs and monsters and player characters, than in Pathfinder. So if you say, hey, the two of you are at opposite ends of a perfectly empty room with nothing in the middle, go. That's a little more dangerous and bloodier than a similar nothing to take cover behind setup might be. And since we are in this far future setting, right, we can frequently say, hey, you guys are in a hover train grav station, and there are chairs and security stations and big screens with departure times, and this is the stuff that you can move around. I had the security camera thing had come up by then,
right.
so I was able to interject some of that.
That was like the first one that really had to think about security cameras.
And it's because there had been some questions earlier that I was able to integrate that with that going forward. Because I had 4 months of feedback compared to what you had. So that was only the first 2 APs, but some of that feedback was already filtering back. People are going to want to hack everything, regardless of whether there are rules for it or not.
And that is true.
That comes up very, very quickly and very often. It can be really important for the game for people to have opportunities to take 10-minute rests. Pathfinder sort of assumes that your basic adventure period is the day, and it does not depend on you in general as a general mechanic for being able to take breaks during the day. Our whole point was we were trying to do something where you did not have to sleep for 8 hours overnight the whole time, but that does mean if we set you in a situation where you can't even take a 10-minute break for a whole bunch of encounters, that becomes particularly punishing. So these are some of the things that I had picked up by the time I was writing mine that I tried to integrate, and of course it's just recently out, like 2 months ago.
July.
Yeah,
So-
that's right. It just
So
stopped.
I'm still seeing how the feedback from that is coming, although mostly that's his problem now. You and Chris.
Yeah, another thing that has come up, I think, that I've learned over the course of, I developed 5 and 6 of Dead Suns and wrote 4, but in the process of those 3, have come to realize and have integrated since from 7 on a little bit about Starship upgrades. When do they happen? Who does them? And a lot of adventures, you kind of have a ticking clock often, and rules as written, we have this takes X number of days per Starship upgrade, and you want the PCs to be able to upgrade their Starship so they can take on the more difficult Starship combat encounters later on. But if you don't necessarily give at least some advice to the GM about where that happens and why it happens, maybe you get something for free because of this, or it's faster because 18 people are helping you out because of this reason, then it becomes it's too nebulous, right?
It can break the narrative flow if you don't give them a feel for when and why and how is this happening over the course of this specific AP.
Especially in cases when you might not be anywhere near home.
Right.
which you would think would happen quite a bit.
Yeah.
In in space, because
Right.
I hear it's big.
It's big, and player characters can upgrade their own ship. That part of the system is sort of set apart from the rest of the system. It doesn't necessarily require any rolls or require necessarily credits, but
But people want a narrative explanation.
narrative because it's supposed to take if it takes days, then or you're in the middle of a battle between volumes 5 and 6. When do they get to upgrade their ship?
Yep.
So and that's the thing. I've not gone through that process yet at all in Starfinder. I don't even think I own a ship, or our team owns a ship. And I think that for that whole thing of adding upgrades and making your ship better and making the crew better and all of that sort of thing, I'm really excited about it. But I don't know how it works at all. And so
it depends
it's a
on
new process.
I guess it depends on how strictly you're doing Starfinder Society stuff, because all the Starfinder Society stuff is no one owns the ships in Starfinder Society, because you'd be grouping with different people every single time. So it's basically every ship. If it's important to this scenario, the Starfinder Society gives you a choice of take this ship or this ship, and it's already got. You don't have to worry about the upgrade. It's built for you.
Right.
But I don't know what you're going to be doing. So you might get to build your own ship. I don't know.
We have to break into Eric's notes, because Mona's the one that's running our game. So
Whereas with the AP, we very carefully want to say, hey, here's a starship you get, here's a map for the starship, here's the name of it, you get it as a group, it's part of the ongoing narrative. So that can become part of that story, so that hopefully you will have the same sort of reaction to it that fans have for name ships like the Firefly, Millennium Falcon. We wanted to have a ship for that first AP that we treat like a major character.
Yeah, and it should be. I can easily see that when if our group ends up getting a ship, it's going to be a thing that it's like
It's your ship.
that's the dream.
Yeah.
You want to have like a starship that you can just fly around everywhere, and it would be amazing. So
And the starship in Dead Suns has basically become the iconic starship for the game.
Yeah.
Like we have the iconic player characters, we have now our iconic starship for all the art and stuff like that. Just draw this, doing this.
And we've got a map of it. We've got a dock
and
map
now
of
we've
part
got
of the exterior.
yeah.
And
So I hate to say this, but we're coming up on out of time.
Oh, wow.
It was. I think that there's more to talk about here. I would like to go in depth into this a lot more. If everybody out there, we can continue this. We can actually bring Rob in and some other folks to get their impressions and all of that sort of thing. But I would like to continue doing a deep dive into this AP. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think that it's interesting to me anyway to hear about the ideas that you had to keep in mind, and how it actually came to building this AP that helped launch this whole game.
Yeah.
That I feel is going pretty good. I feel like it's a good thing. So And somebody in chat, somebody said, "Are you not getting enough sleep because you're yawning?" And Jake Bacon says, "Owen does not sleep; he waits."
That is a much better answer than anything I'd come up with. So I will stick with that.
I love it. I'm sorry for Nightbot. I need to tune him up. Nightbot is a little it's a little cantankerous right now. I think that if you put more than 4 emotes in a row or something like that, so I'm really sorry that he deleted your stuff.
Oh no,
that was not the intention. Yeah, I need to tune it. I need to tune Nightbot a little bit better. That's totally on me. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me on this show.
Absolutely.
I want to continue doing this. And also, the other thing that I'm wondering is we did a show, because it's a new game, we did a how to build a character for the Pathfinder playtest a little bit ago, where we went through the sheet and kind of highlighted everything in the steps that makes the most sense. And I thought it might be fun to do that with Starfinder. Take the character sheet and just kind of sit down and go in order, just because it might be remedial for some folks out there that have already played. But I think that it also might be really good, because I've played it and we just leveled up and I still miss stuff. And I was like, oh, I should have done this. And you have that awkward moment where you're like, oh, if I would have done this like I should have, that fight would have gone way different, I promise, you know.
Not only can we do that, but once we start releasing stuff for the beginner box, which we announced back at Gen Con, that is another case where I would love to have a show where we say, hey, if you've cracked open the beginner box, let us walk you through that process.
Yeah, I would love that. I think that would be well, no, it's spoilery. I always want to play stuff. I would like, hey, let's play, and you can join us and watch, but it's spoilery, and I get that.
Well, we could do a scenario.
Unboxing.
Yes. Well, we could do an unboxing. I think that's a great idea, but we could
Everybody loves an unboxing.
we could make a short scenario that isn't the scenario in the beginner box.
And play that. An original?
Yeah.
Yes, let's do that. That's what we'll do. All right, I'm in.
Okay.
So
I'm glad you volunteered to do that.
I just did.
I can't believe Alan did that on the stream, and it's going to go up on YouTube later, and it's now living in perpetuity.
Did that for Starfinder when it was coming out, right?
Yeah.
I made stuff up for people for that. So, and the beginner box will be faster and easier.
We'll get that tuned up quick. I think that'd be fun. I would love to do that. So as soon as we can. Again, thank you. This was a good time. The hour went by so fast.
It did. It went really fast.
Blown away by that. As we get closer to the As we get closer to the beginner box, we'll try to do some more stuff with that. Like I said, I would like to do some more beginner level stuff with Starfinder to make sure that everybody's kind of following along and kind of gets it. But I don't want that to slow down this show at all. I want to make sure that we're still kind of forging ahead. So we'll come up with something. We're smart people. We'll figure it out.
It's true. They're smart people.
I want to say thank you for joining us today. It's been a fun Wednesday talking about Starfinder. If you've not had a chance, you can go to our site now. You can go to our site and pick up AP number 1 for Dead Sun's Adventure Path, Incident Absalom Station, written by Robert G. McCreary, also known as Rob G. McC on Twitter, which is one of the best Twitter handles I can think of. And then also
get all 6 of them.
And once you do the first one, it's like Pringles.
You got it.
Once
you got to get them
first
all.
one, you're going to get all of them. And then also these lovely fellows right here, their Twitter handle their handles are listed right below their names there. So feel free to give them a follow and talk to them. That's my Twitter handle right there. Give me a follow and give me some feedback on the show if you have something to say. So I would love that. And in the meantime, we've got a show coming up Thursday. We're doing the live play, continuing with Chapter 2 of Doomsday Dawn. Logan is going to be running that. Then Friday, we're doing Deconstructing Doomsday Dawn with Logan back again, talking about Chapter 2. It's going to be a blast. And then after that, we're probably going to be hosting Glass Cannon, because I think they're going to be playing Chapter 2.
Oh, great.
In Pale Mountain Shadow, I believe is what it's called.
Yep.
So that's going to be good. We've got a lot of Twitch stuff coming your way for the rest of the week. So, that's about it. So, any goodbye words, fellas?
Goodbye.
Hey, there it is.
Later.
So for Jason Keeley and for Owen Casey Stevens, for Paizo, and for me, your old buddy Dan, thank you for joining us, and we will see you back here tomorrow. Bye!